So please put your hands together and join me in giving Miss Katie Huie a warm Georgia Tech welcome.
Are we on? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I need to thank John Stanford of the Dunning Technology and Management Program for introducing me to Dory. And I definitely need to thank Dory for being willing to take a chance on a rookie like me joining this stage with lots of other prestigious speakers and leaders in our community. So thanks to both of you. Also, thanks to all of you for being in the audience today. I know how crazy and chaotic your schedules are between school demands, family, job, sororities, fraternities, projects. I get it. So thank you very much for being here. I plan on speaking to you for about 35 minutes today, and then we'll do Q&A for as long as they let me stand up here. Sound fair? Okay, great. Let's take a look. So our agenda, we're going to talk a few minutes about me. Want to make sure you guys know a little bit more about who in the world is on stage speaking with you today. So going to give you a little biography. Also going to be speaking a few minutes about Elavon, the company that I work for. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time in a section I call About Life. So we'll dig into that in about 10 minutes. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A. And feel free to ask anything you want. Whatever floats your boat is A-okay with me. I will do my best to answer your question to the best of my ability. So, about me. I was born in 1973. And that may seem like a really long time ago. When you get to be 42, it won't seem that long ago, so be nice. And at the time, my dad was a graduate student, and he was getting his degree in geology. So we're big Tar Heel fans in my family. When I was a young toddler, we made a short trip to Illinois. All I remember about that state is the blinding white of winter and a very puffy snowsuit. That's it. That is the sum total of my experience in Illinois. From there, we moved to the Lone Star State, where my dad began working for NASA as a geochemist. And it was the time of supporting the shuttle program and rockets and studying moon rocks. So it was a wonderful time to be involved in the NASA community. And at that time, my family and I only had one car. I know it's almost unheard of in today's families, but nonetheless, we had one car. So every afternoon, my mom would package up my younger brother and I and ship us off to NASA, and we would wait for Dad to wrap up his day. And if we were a little bit early or he was busy wrapping things up, we would play at the base of rockets that were displayed out of doors. Talk about building your innovation capability, right? And hats off to my mother, who is so remarkable at helping us build our imaginations. She let my brother and I soar in terms of our mental thinking. There were no limits to what we could do when we were growing up. And that was really wonderful foundation for me. From there, we moved to a little town just south of San Francisco called Half Moon Bay. Beautiful coastal small town right there along the beaches. You could surf and ski all in one day. It was fantastic. My dad at the time was working for the U.S. Geological Survey out of Menlo Park, and so science was always a part of our life. So between my mother's imagination and her soft skills and my father's repertoire of hypotheses and structure, it was a wonderful balance for my brother and I to grow up in as a kind, loving, warm, and imaginative family. I'm often asked, what was your first job and how old were you when you got it? Well, at the ripe old age of 12, I asked my parents for more allowance, and I was promptly denied. No way. And I asked again, can I please have some more allowance? No. If you want more allowance, you need to get a job. What? I'm going to school, I'm already babysitting on the weekdays and the weekends. I just want more money. So my greed was met with another denial. And so I thought, well, I've really got to think about this. So the next day, I mustered up enough courage to march into the administration office at the junior high and ask for a worker's permit. And I presented that to my parents that night. And I think at that moment, they knew they were in trouble. They knew that they had a very ambitious young woman on their hands, and they were going to be in for it. And I think I proved them right over the next several decades. Nonetheless, within a couple of weeks after they signed my worker's permit, I joined my mom at a job at a local upscale boutique in town. It was a wonderful kind of clothing store, lots of Pendleton products, if you've heard of that brand, so on and so forth. I did everything from gift wrapping to cleaning the bathrooms to inventory to stocking the employee refrigerator, whatever worked. And it might sound rather silly and simple now, but at that point, at 12 years old, earning my own paycheck, being part of a pack like that, making a contribution, I was in love with working, absolutely in love with it. And I've pretty much been working ever since. So from that meager start, I went on to work for a bike and toy store in town. I learned how to build bikes. It was great, because then you could build a bike and head out to the hills and go for it and ride them all the way down to the beach. And I also worked at a beauty supply store in the latter half of high school. So by the time I finished high school in 1991, I roughly had 6 years of working experience behind me. And that not only was unusual at that particular time, but it felt great, and it gave me a whole new level of confidence in terms of where my skills were, where I felt most in the flow, and my life purpose began to take shape at that point in the form of serving others. So more on that later. From San Francisco, I decided to move around the Bay Area a fair bit. I went to college at Sonoma State. It's a very small school nestled in the hills of Northern California, wine country. It was a wonderful college career. And I actually graduated with a degree in sociology. I started out pre-med and ended up in sociology. I know that's a bit of a shift. That's okay. We'll talk more about that in the About Life section as well. But nonetheless, I graduated college and something just wasn't right. I explored retail management. I explored being an executive assistant. I went into recruiting. I had a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends. I learned a lot, but something just wasn't quite right yet until I found a sales operations role for a medium-sized technology company in the Bay Area, and I was in love. Absolutely in love with it. And so even though I really enjoyed the role, my heart wasn't really happy at that time. The hustle and bustle of the Bay Area just wasn't quite right for me. And so I ended up finding my way to the Peach State in 2001, and I've been here ever since, and it's definitely home to my heart. And so in 2001, I began another adventure in sales and marketing operations, and found myself within that role for a variety of companies and absolutely enjoyed it. I loved being able to support the front line, whatever that front line wanted, because I didn't want to be them. I just wanted to support them. I didn't want a quota. I just wanted to make sure they reached theirs, right? There's a difference. There's a really big difference. And so I really enjoyed that. I also began working for a consulting firm. I know many of you as students are very interested in the consulting world, and that was a lot of fun too. It was in 2010, though, that I recognized that I needed a change. One of the constant themes with my management staff over the years had been, Katie, you are constantly challenging the status quo. You never let it go. You are so dedicated to continuous improvement. You are wearing us out. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to find a role where I'm supposed to be doing that, right? Maybe I need to find a manager who really isn't threatened by that, but really wants me to do that. So luckily I found a role at Elavon, and I have been happy as a lark ever since. So this next slide is something that requires me to expose my sensitive underbelly, okay? Like a wild animal, like a hedgehog, okay? And here's what I did. I'm a big believer in voice of customer, right? Anytime you launch a product, anytime you're gonna put something out into the world for people to consume, hopefully before you do that, you've checked in with the people who are going to consume it, right? So hence voice of customer. Voice of partner works very much the same way, okay? And so I thought, well, if I'm really gonna live what I believe, then I should incorporate that into my impact speech. So I did. So I asked roughly 20 of my colleagues for 5 to 10 one-word descriptions of me. I didn't pay them. I didn't provide them with any samples. I said, give me the good, the bad, and the ugly. And here's what I ended up with. Now, much to my surprise, there's not a lot of ugly on there. And that moment when I realized not only did I receive the specific feedback back that I asked for, But the paragraphs of information and the examples they gave of why they picked those words, it was fascinating. I'll admit it, I went home and cried, right? Because I was simply so grateful that not only was I a relatively decent person, right? I could give this to my mom so she could put it on the refrigerator, but you did okay, Mom, really, you did. That, you know, it's the most insightful thing you could possibly do. So your first challenge of the day is, if you're really curious about what people think about you, ask them. Just ask, right? Even if it's not so great, even if it's something that you're a little uncomfortable with, the things you will learn about yourself and about your relationship from that, it'll take you a long way. So with that, we'll talk about Elavon for a couple of minutes, and then we'll dive into the bulk of our material. From an Elavon standpoint, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of US Bank. US Bank has a presence in roughly 25 states. Some of you looking a little quizzical about US Bank. Who, what? Okay. That's because Georgia's not in US Bank's footprint. That's okay. Nonetheless, we're still the top 5 global payment providers. We have over 1 million customers globally. We do business in many, many countries around the world. Some of our recent expansions have been in Mexico, Brazil, and Spain. We're very proud to share that Fortune magazine has voted us the most admired super regional bank several years in a row, and we're very hopeful and aspire to earn that again. From a numbers standpoint, we have over $400 billion in assets and over 60,000 employees globally. So not too tiny, right? In terms of why Elavon is a good match for me, well, for me it starts at the top. It starts with the caliber of leaders that we have at our company, of which there are many. I'm extremely fortunate to work for this company. Richard Davis is our CEO. He started as a teller in his late teens and worked his way all the way up. It's taken him a couple of decades, but he did it, right? And one of the things that I greatly admire is that loyalty, that sense of service, and he really helps build a wonderful culture within our organization. Our company has also declared and defined very specific core values, and these are actually very personally important to me. I try to incorporate them in every initiative, every project, every relationship, every interaction. Sometimes I fall off the bus, as some of my colleagues here will tell you, but I just try to leap right back on, right? Like a moving train, just get right back on, okay? Those values include: we do the right thing, we power potential, we stay a step ahead, we draw strength from diversity, and we put people first. Not a bad list of things to aspire to every day, right? Philanthropic activity. Our company is very dedicated to serving our communities. At any time, there are dozens of opportunities around the world for Elavon and US Bank employees to dedicate themselves to the needs of others. And that's one of the reasons I greatly identify with our company. We're also very dedicated to continuous improvement. Harken back to my managers who told me, you just never stop changing stuff. Right? So this is a piece of our company that greatly speaks to me. From a personal level, the role matches my strengths. Being within the product and innovation organization has been wonderful. I get to meet with partners. I get to work with the dining technology management program. I get to do all sorts of wonderful things for the overall growth of our product portfolio. And that is really wonderful. Also, my management chain. I gotta really hand it to people like Lori Hockmeister, who's my direct supervisor. She has me pegged. She knows exactly what will make me thrive. She knows what makes me wilt and wince and gnash my teeth, right? And she tries to provide me with a wealth of opportunities to experience a little bit of everything. And for that, I'm very grateful. All right, the bulk, the thing about life. When Dory asked me to speak to you today, I had so many different ideas. I got into brainstorming mode, and for any of you who've been in that mode, you just know the ideas start pouring out of you, right? And you may not know exactly what the right fit is yet, but you've got a lot of stuff on paper to shuffle through. And so what I ended up doing was trying to put myself in the seat of a student and thinking, well, golly, if I was 20-something years old, probably an undergrad student, what on earth would I want to know from someone on stage? And so I decided to look back at my life and decide what were some of the topics that I would want to know, what are some of the life lessons that I would want to incorporate earlier in my life so that I could truly thrive instead of just struggle and survive and just get by. So these are some of my personal experiences as we move into the section. Couple of warnings though. One, they seem simple, they're not easy. Okay, so consider yourself warned. Two, just because I'm up here talking about them doesn't mean I'm a master. I still consider myself an apprentice. I still consider myself to be learning these things as well. So bear with me as I go. So, number one, know yourself. And what I've done with each of these is also pair it with a question to ask yourself, and there's a cheat sheet at the back if you just want a one-pager on all this. But know yourself. Ask yourself, what are my strengths? There's a lot of assessments available to us today. It's important to pick the right one, but they're available online. Many are free. Many are available through your professors in your different programs and classes. Take them. By all means, please take them, okay? 4 that I've had a lot of success with: Myers-Briggs, Positive Intelligence, StrengthsFinder, and Foresight. Each of them are complementary to one another, but I do encourage you to explore them, consider taking them, because they'll be a wonderful part of your personal portfolio. And once you know your strengths, lean into them, right? Get good at articulating them so that when you're in interviews, that when you're meeting new people, that you can speak strongly to them, okay? Our culture tends to be very hyper-focused on our weaknesses, right? You can have a 30-minute performance review, 25 minutes are glowing comments about how awesome you are. The last 5 minutes are one itty-bitty little space for needs improvement, and then you spend the next 6 months worrying about that, right? And then you forgot about the previous 25 minutes of awesomeness. So, lean into your strengths. Think about it like being in a car. You better look through the windshield a whole lot more than you do the rearview mirror, right? So your strengths are forward, your weaknesses are behind you. It's still important, but don't roll around in them, okay? Next, follow your passion. Ask yourself, when am I most in the flow? One of the best examples I can think of this is my brother-in-law. His name is Chris Stalkup. He's the lead singer of a band called Chris Stalkup at the Grange. One of the great things about him is that he lives a standard corporate life by day. Right? No one would know except for maybe the long hair, okay? But by night, by weekend, he is traveling the Southeast with his bandmates, playing music, making friends, and making his own form of magic, right? That is when he is most in the flow. And I greatly admire him for that. He found it, he works it, he lives it, and he's dedicated himself to it. You too have the ability to find your passion and live to it. Right? So pay attention to your gut. When something feels weird, pay attention, okay? I've met lots of students over the last couple of years who dreamt of being an electrical, aeronautical, mechanical engineer of some sort, right? I've had the opportunity to speak to a couple of them, and in secret, behind a hall and closed doors where no one can hear them, they admit they hate it. It's awful, right? They got into classes, they can't stand it. Well, change majors, right? That suggestion is met with complete shock. Well, why would I do that? I grew up wanting to be this thing my whole life. Well, if you're getting into it and it's not working for you, change it. It's okay, really. What's the worst thing that's gonna happen? You might go to school a little while longer. You'll probably surprise yourself. You'll really surprise your parents, probably. But really, the sky won't fall. So don't be afraid to try on new things. Explore, experiment, do what I call prototype, right? The first time you try something, it's just a prototype, especially if it doesn't work out well. It's a great way to label it, right? Just prototype it. It's okay. Number 3, achieve your balance. Ask yourself, does this fuel me or does this fail me? Okay? Achieving life balance is very difficult. It doesn't matter if you're a student, a professor, you're in the corporate world, you're a stay-at-home mom, it doesn't matter. Achieving balance is very, very difficult, and it's a daily task, okay? Regardless of your role, regardless of your income, so on and so forth. So my encouragement to you is this: small challenge for you. On those days, in fact every day, because most of them are some difficult to get through with our chaotic schedules and all the demands that we all have a cell phone, right? They all have a timer. Set it for 15 minutes. a day, somewhere, between classes, before you go to bed, in the morning, whatever works for you. Set it for 15 minutes, and in that 15 minutes, do something that honors your authentic self. Meditate, do yoga, walk the dog, jog around the block. I went to Yogli Mowgli today. I love that place, right? And I had strawberry yogurt with gummy bears, right? Because that felt fun. That's what I needed to do to honor myself and get me through this evening, right? So find something that works for you. Do it in small chunks of time, and then over time, you will begin to feel the pendulum swing from inner chaos to a little more serenity. Avoid prison. Naturally, okay? Naturally, no one wants to be incarcerated. I get it. You're probably wondering how weird I really am at this point. Nonetheless, the prison I'm talking about is between your two ears. You may talk to your friends a lot, you may talk to your roommate a lot, you may talk to your parents a lot, you may talk to a boyfriend or girlfriend a lot, but the person you talk to the most is yourself, right? So we better start taking inventory of what it is we're actually saying to ourselves. And believe it or not, a lot of what we express to ourselves are doubt and fears. It might go something like this: oh my gosh, this class sucks. I'm never gonna pass this test. That ME 201 thing, who invented that, right? I'm never gonna graduate. My parents are gonna kill me if I do that, right? That whole train of thought, do you guys recognize some of those thoughts? Right, that's all negative thinking that you're using to fuel yourself. Can you really get through your day fueling yourself with that kind of negativity? Not so much, right? That makes life hard. Why would we want to make life harder on ourselves than it already is, right? So, another challenge for you, if you choose to accept it, that is, for a week, just a week, take a mental note of every negative thought you have, every doubt, every fear, every complaint, every concern that you have. If it is negative in any way, shape, or form, take a mental tally. By the end of the week, you will likely be astounded at how much garbage you have fed yourself in that time frame. Even an optimist like me, when I took that experiment, woo, that was an eye-opener, okay? So for a week, count it up, see what you think. And if you're willing to change it, start asking yourself this question: is this thought helpful? If you're like me, a very snotty 13-year-old answers back and says, well, no, of course it's not helpful, right? You may have your own inner snotty teenager that responds back to you. Own it, it's okay. But from that, you're able to recognize it, label it, and deal with it. And when you start to deal with it, it can be really simple stuff that you use to change your thinking pattern. Change the radio, call a friend, go for a walk, get up and just move around, do a couple jumping jacks, whatever works for you. But any movement, any kind of different thought will help you change that pattern. And that's all you're trying to do, okay? Neuroscience proves time and time again we can build new pathways in our brain. So let's do that. Number 5, find your tribe. Ask yourself, who is in my theater, okay? If we were in a movie theater, pretend we are today, and there's a beautiful, elaborate red velvet curtain, and the lighting is just right, and you can smell popcorn waving in, and it's your life on the big screen. Who's in there watching with you? Who have you invited into your theater to witness your life? Who's in your front row? Is it who you really expect? Who's trying to get in the doors and you haven't let them? Who's out in the parking lot and forgot your life was playing on the screen? Right? So ask yourself, who is in my theater? I was extremely fortunate to grow up in a very loving family, and I know how rare that is, and I treasure that. And so my family is in the first row. My husband, who's actually in the second row physically today, he's in the front row too. Our little girl Josie, that brilliant, spirited 2-year-old, is also in the front row. She's the best teacher I've ever had, and she can only speak 3-word sentences, okay? There's lots of wonderful, giving, kind, loving people in my theater. I'm very fortunate for that. But the people in my theater are not yes people, okay? So I encourage you, do not invite yes people into your life. Invite people into your life who will really challenge who you are, who will not let you get away with your worst when you can do your best. And I also encourage you to think about diversity, right? Think about people who are different than you are, different background, different height, different major, different something. Invite differentness into your life, because when we invite that kind of differentness into our life, you'll be surprised how much magic can really happen. Number 6, ask questions. What do I need or want to know? So ask yourself relevant questions, right? Don't ask questions just for the sake of asking questions or you're nervous or something like that, but ask relevant questions. A lot of people, when they enter the workforce, they're afraid to ask questions. They don't want to look stupid. We've got a lot of pride attached to asking questions, so on and so forth. So I encourage you to ask questions like a child. Forget the pride. They have no marriage to the outcome of the answer. Just ask the question. Naturally, how you ask a question can make a huge difference. So think about that before the words actually leap from your mouth, okay? But do ask questions and think of it in a childlike manner. Number 7, be palms open. Think about a boxer, right? You're closed off. You're trying to shrink the target a little bit. Your hands are up in front of your face. Your chin is down. Your knees are bent. You're ready to leap, bob, weave, whatever it takes, right? That's a defensive posture. A lot of people spend their life going through with closed fists, with guarding themselves from the world, okay? I encourage you to open up a little bit. Be palms open. And along the path of life, ask yourself, am I really being open to this? If I'm not, why? What fear is being brought up here? What am I really experiencing? Why do I feel the need to be defensive? Why did I just massacre that person in a meeting? Oh, that was ugly, right? Whatever the scenario is, ask yourself, am I being open or closed? And then if you're brave, dig into the reasons why. Number 8, embrace change. Ask yourself, what can I learn? So our vertical axis is pessimism. Our horizontal axis is time. This is a standard bell curve. Most of us have seen some version of this. But when we consider change, there's change that we invoke in our lives, and there's change that happens to us. And naturally, we're a little bit more closed or open depending on which one it was, right? Change that happens to us, we get a little defensive. Change that we invoke, we tend to be a little bit more open. We will talk about change as dating, right? So you meet someone, wow, they're fantastic. Right, they're great. Your knees get a little weak. Your heart might beat. Oh, you're just a little sweaty. You're a little nervous, right? Oh, okay. There's nothing they can do wrong. They are perfect in every way. Oh my gosh, this is the one. Are you sure? Really? Okay. So as you go across this dating bell curve, you go out for a couple of dates and you realize, oh, I think I was wrong. Oh boy, wait a minute. They never put their phone down at dinner. They're constantly late. Oh my gosh, they forgot about that thing we agreed to do. Oh boy, this is trouble, right? And that's just with a few facts that present themselves, right? So we start out really optimistic, no facts whatsoever, and then we gather a little more facts, and then we start getting cold feet, okay? And at that point, if enough perceived negative facts, build up, then we start checking out. Right? You may not text them back right away. You may not text them back at all. You may not show up for a date. You may claim you've got something else to do before you set the date. But somehow, some way, we publicly or privately check out. Normally, though, if we can cope with those facts and we realize they're probably pretty little in the scheme of things, then we start heading towards some greater optimism and some more acceptance. And hey, this person isn't so bad after all. I was being a little rough on them. They're actually a great companion, okay? So think about it like dating. And along the way, ask yourself, what can I learn? Keep in mind, though, that how fast we go through this depends on whether or not we're embracing change, right? So if you are approaching change as closed-fisted, you're probably going to stall at checking out or pessimism for a long time. So lean into change wherever you can. Lean in on your tribe. right? Lean in on your strengths, all the things that we've already talked about, and get over that hump of pessimism and glide right on into acceptance. Number 9, overcome obstacles. Ask yourself, how is this useful? Imagine yourself in a deep, dark, muddy hole in the earth, right? Like a well, okay? There's no rope, there's no ladder, and there ain't nobody coming to help you. Whew, that's a dilemma, right? When dirt piles in on you, you can either stomp it down, and if you stomp down enough dirt, you can hop your way out of the hole. Or you can let that dirt bury you. And that's probably not a great option, okay? So I do encourage you, when you feel mired in the muck of life and changes that are perceived to be negative keep coming at you, and you just feel like you're taking it cheek after cheek, ask yourself, how is this really useful? There's probably a silver lining there somewhere. You just have to look for it. And you may have to look hard, but it is always, always there. One of my personal stories happened about a decade ago. I was working for a technology company, and as it happens, new executive members joined the team, right? And everybody, of course, ramps up for that, and there's this kind of mild panic and excitement that runs through an organization. And as standard kind of cultural protocol happens, you define your org chart, and you put a package of numbers and statistics and risks and strengths all together, so when the new executives walk on board, you can hand them this beautiful package of information, and off to the races they will go in leading your company, right? Many of us have experienced that. It happens time and time again with the change in leadership. So at this particular time, I had helped put one of those packages together. And executives normally meet with their directs, and then the next layer of directs, and then the next layer. And so eventually I got my opportunity to meet one-on-one with one of the new executives, and I was so excited. I was so excited as a younger professional. I had my stuff together, and I had studied this person on LinkedIn. I had studied the school where she went to college. I had done all sorts of homework. I had asked other people who had met with her, was she direct? Was she not? Was she extroverted? Was she introverted? I was as prepared as I possibly thought I could have been. My day of glory comes. I walk into the office, we shake hands, there's some pleasantries, we sit down. After the pleasantries, she tells me, Katie, you will never succeed here, and I will make sure of it. What was that? Excuse me, what? I remember my mouth dropping. I think all the blood in my entire body ran down into my feet. I have no clue how I responded at all. Like, I went into shock. I have no idea. I can't tell you at all. I have no idea how I got back to my desk. I think I shook her hand and said, thank you, and left. I mean, I was so blown away at what had happened. And to this day, I have no idea what caused that conversation. I don't know at all. And I remember going back to my direct manager, and it's after I could learn to speak English again, after that situation, I told my manager, and my manager says, you're lying. She would never tell you that. And I thought, well, my goose is cooked. I'm done. Right, that's it. And so you can imagine how big of a pile of dirt that was on me, right? For an executive to tell me that, and then for my manager to not believe me, woo! That was a big lesson in life. But you know what? I started looking for that silver lining. I did a lot of emotional excavation, and I realized, you know what? You aren't really happy here. And maybe that's just the invitation to leave that you needed. So I put my resume together, I hit the streets interviewing, and it ended up with a wonderful new adventure for myself. So take the dirt that comes your way, stomp that junk down, find your way out of the hole, and find yourself that silver lining. Number 10, improve continuously. As we talked about in terms of our Elavon profile, this is something our company is dedicated to. This is something I am personally dedicated to as well. You can ask my life coach. It's almost an addiction for me. Okay, I'm a little bit of a hyperachiever. So the only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday, right? If you fall off the wagon, just get back on. None of us really want to be the same person 10 years from now that we are today. You guys would like to graduate, for example, right? So you don't want to be a perpetual student, more than likely, Okay? So to do that, that means we have to invoke change. When we invoke change, we have to embrace it. We've got to lean in. We've got to find our tribe. We've got to nurture our relationships. We've got to know our strengths. It's all got to come together, okay? So embrace change. Always ask yourself, what's next? There's always an adventure lurking there somewhere for you. So in closing, as we wrap up, this is your summary cheat sheet I alluded to a little bit earlier. If you choose to challenge yourself with these questions. And in conclusion, one of my favorite books is Alice in Wonderland. It's just weird enough and yet just solid enough for me to really relate to it. But timid Alice says there is no use trying. One can't believe impossible things. And that feisty, fiery queen says back, I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. So with that, I encourage you, please choose to thrive. Don't just survive. Please choose to flourish. Go with your flow, find your passion, embrace change. Don't just skate by. And please believe lots of impossible things. Thank you. Questions? I'll stay as long as they allow me to.
Hello. This is Katie. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I was wondering, earlier you talked about your sales operation role in San
Yes.
Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
As an upcoming graduate on the job search, how much weight would you put on the location when searching? Is it something more personal and based on experience, or how would you judge that?
I would suggest always visiting that location first, right? Get there. Try it on for size. Sometimes when you get off the plane, you realize, ooh, this is fantastic, right? And it's kind of like slipping on a comfortable pair of jeans. There's other times where you can wander around a city and think, oh no, this is not going to work for me. It's kind of the same thing as when you did tours for college, right? You went to this college, you went to that college, you went over here, you went over there. Some of them felt right, some of them didn't. Same thing with a company search. Does that help? Okay.
Great presentation, by the way. And
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the first point and your last point. Know yourself and then moving forward. At the very end, you said that. But there's one thing about knowing yourself I want to ask you.
Sure.
What happens when you come to those shortcomings? Something that you actually have to look at yourself and say, there's something wrong, I'm not doing something right. How do you do that, or how have you done that in your career? And also, what makes that thing wrong? Is it society standards? Because society is not always right.
Those
We've
are
changed
tricky.
a lot in society. So how do you really say, this isn't okay? Or maybe it's like, I am learning more and I'm actually changing that trend.
Right. So I can speak from my personal experience, and I've always been a little bit of an outlier. I've always done things a little bit differently. And what that means is that I've always been more aware of when I didn't fit in, right? It's in the eye contact you have with your colleagues or friends. It's just in a general gut feeling that you have, right? So it is important to ask yourself, am I bending, right? Know what your values are, for starters, right? So if your values are X, Y, and Z, and you're part of a corporate culture or a societal culture that doesn't honor those values, it's time to make some changes. And it might come down to some really crucial conversations, right? One, with yourself, but with the other people in that particular culture. And I would also hearken back to leaning in on your tribe, letting them know, hey, you know what? I just feel like I'm wearing somebody else's shoes. Is it me? What have you observed about me, right? So start that kind of inquiry. But certainly any time that you are not honoring your own values, you will continue to feel out of sync. And so the best thing we can do is explore what options there might be to continue to honor those values. And sometimes it means significant changes in our life, big changes, right? And sometimes those are hard, but it doesn't mean that the end result isn't wonderfully worth it. Does that help a little bit? You're welcome.
My turn? Okay. Hi.
Hi.
What is the most impossible thing that you've believed and sought after?
Oh. Well, I tend to believe a lot of impossible things with great regularity. It's part of that imagination. I would say once upon a time, I thought I would never be a mother. My life circumstances were such that it did not seem possible at all. And that was one of my life's greatest dreams. Most of the people close to me had thought, well, she's just so maternal, she should have a kid. And then a series of life circumstances happened, and I realized, oh my gosh, if I make this really big change in my life, I will, the way I'm doing the math, I don't think I'll be able to do that. And so that sense of grief and that sense of loss that I felt that potential realization was devastating. And then I realized, when I asked myself, is this thought helpful, right? I had built my own little prison in my mind that my new circumstances wouldn't lead to motherhood. And as soon as I got a grip on, girl, you need to let that go. You've got to let that go. You just never know what magic is out there, right? And as soon as you let it go, your soul can really breathe, and you start meeting people, and magic happens, and lo and behold, here I am, the mother of a 2.5-year-old, right? So impossible things definitely can happen. You have to get out of your own prison a little bit. Does that help? Okay. Great.
So I wanted to say, you commented on embracing change. So was there a time where you just were having a really hard time being able to embrace a change?
Yeah. Just because you get better at embracing change doesn't mean you always love it, right? Sometimes you gotta fake it till you make it. For me, I try to ask myself, what is my problem? Why am I stiff-arming this change, right? I am really blocking this thing out. Is it the person? Is it the circumstance? Is it a perceived threat? Like, what about the change is making me so angry, venomous, sad, whatever that is? And when you ask yourself that, all sorts of answers come to mind, but it's in that inquiry process that it makes a huge difference. So it's not to say you shouldn't give yourself a little breathing room, right? Even if you accept the circumstances, it doesn't always mean you'll be joyful. Those are two different states of mind, right? So with change, depending on what the change is, you do need to allow yourself some time to live with it, right? Especially if it's a negative change. Divorce, death in a family, you don't get a promotion at work, you didn't get the job you thought you wanted, so on and so forth, whatever it is. You do need to give yourself some time to kind of roll around in that a little bit, but it's extremely important to rebound. You've got to be able to rebound. And in order to rebound, you've got to go through that inquiry process of, why am I feeling this? How can I potentially change this? And what's that silver lining? Does that help? Okay, sure. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So going back to point one about knowing yourself, you
Yes.
talked about the Myers-Briggs type.
Yes.
This is just sort of a two-part question. What is your Myers-Briggs type, out of curiosity? And then how do you use that knowledge personally to try to, I guess, improve yourself or be more aware of what you're trying to do?
Sure. So Myers-Briggs is a pretty widely used assessment to assess your introversion, extroversion levels, if you're feeling or sensing things of that nature. You might hear a lot of people talking about it as, I'm an ENFJ, or I'm an ET something something, right? Because the result is in the 4 letters there that don't dictate, but resemble a piece of who you are. In terms of your second piece of your question, how do you use? What is mine? Oh, I'm ENFJ. Do you guys know what that means? Okay. Yeah, a lot of the students have taken it, so I hope your giggles are complimentary. And then how do you use those strengths once you know about them? I know I have to be around people. I took a Strength Finder assessment as well. Number 1 is woo. For anyone who's taken that, it means she's great at a conference, right? She's great with a crowd. So I know that I'm a pack animal. I must be around people. My husband knows this. We need social time, book something Saturday night, please, let's go, right? So I know I need a healthy part of socialization in my life, but I also know that I'm introverted enough that I also have to have solitude, right? So I have to be able to recharge that battery. Otherwise, when I do go out in the wild, wild world and meld with my people, I'm properly fueled for that. So yeah, accumulate your facts, be able to articulate them, talk about them with your parents, your friends, your boss. They're extremely helpful in performance reviews as well as interviews. So for those of you moving into the world of work, please know what your strengths are and be able to talk about them. Know exactly what makes you thrive and what will make you wilt. For example, if I were to be an accountant, my colleagues now know that would be a really bad match, right? I can't do the same thing day in, day out repeatedly. I'll just be a pile of anger, right? So, so it's really important to, in your interview process, to be able to articulate that. And a lot of times when we're young in our careers, we often don't think we have the right to ask questions about the role, right? You think you talk about pay, you talk about location, you might talk about number of hours, but you don't necessarily get down to the nitty-gritty of culture and how you and your skills might fit into that. And that's a wonderful place to use that new level of self-awareness. If you don't have that conversation with your future employers, you're taking a huge risk. Does that help? Yes.
Hi. So who is a person that you consider a role model in your life right now, and how and why have they impacted you?
Oh, got a lot. That's a long list. I'm very fortunate that there's a lot of wonderful people in my theater. And one of the things that I try to do is, regardless of someone's role in my particular life, I try to find wonderful things about them that I want to aspire to or that I want to show appreciation to. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty narrowing it down to one. I will say that one of my newer attendees in my theater is my life coach, Denise Hall. And one of the reasons I respect her tremendously is that she left the corporate world after many, many years because, as she said, I wasn't living to my values, and now she is. So to make that kind of dramatic change in one's life, to embrace that, to invoke a huge change into your life and your family's life, I happen to think that's very courageous and very honorable, and so I will answer your question with Denise.
I have a question over here.
Yes.
A lot of us are graduating. We're either graduate students or undergrads. We're moving on somewhere at some point in the future, hopefully. So I'm hoping this is going to be relevant to a couple people. But I wanted to hear a little bit more about your move from San Francisco over to here.
Sure.
Because you seem to be really, you highly value community, you highly value having a tribe around you.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, it's like you're in a position in San Francisco where you do have your friends, your family is there, and you're kind of giving all of that up for something that may or may not be incrementally better.
Right.
I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So a contributing factor to that was indeed a romantic relationship. So I do owe you that level of honesty. But in reality, in growing up in California, going to high school as well as college there, and then my career blossoming afterwards, everyone I had ever known had said, "Are you sure you belong here? Because you just seem really Southern." Right? In fact, when my college friends realized I didn't have a double name like Linda Lou or Sally Mae or something like that, they made one up for me because I was just so oddly Southern in San Francisco. And so they started calling me Katie Mae, right? So even though it's humorous and things like that, those I considered little signals in my life that I should probably pay attention to, right? If I'm feeling a little bit like an outlier, like I shared earlier, and people are telling me I'm a little bit of an outlier, then by golly, how much more information do I need, right? So it wasn't that San Francisco wasn't incredible, right? The topography, the restaurants, the culture, the everything is absolutely fantastic. But when it doesn't speak to your heart, it's time to make a change. And so for me, with Southern roots in Nashville, otherwise known as Nash Vegas, and being born in North Carolina and having lots of friends and family in the South is just what spoke to me. And at the time, moving to a metropolitan area, because I was from San Francisco, was really important. So that's why I chose the biggest city in the South to move to. Does that answer your question? Okay. Hi.
So you mentioned these 10 pieces of advice about life.
Mm-hmm.
Which one have you found to be the most difficult to follow?
Is this thought helpful? At least this week. The themes change week to week depending on what you're doing, what your projects are, how close to a deadline you might be. But that one's the trickiest because our inner voices, they've been with us a long time, right? A long time. They're ever present. And so they're so sneaky that way because they can just kind of smooth right on in. And so they're really difficult to catch in the act, right? Hand in the cookie jar. And so that's the one I probably struggle with the most because there's certain voices I'm just used to hearing. And I don't always catch myself in terms of how I might be undermining my own efforts. So that's the one I would point to today. Call me, we'll talk next week. It might be something different.
You talked of improving continuously.
Yes.
What are the steps you take daily to make sure that happens?
Well, I try to start from a position of gratitude and fullness instead of scarcity. So when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. every morning, right, honey? It's not always a stream of positive thoughts that comes out, right? Oh my gosh, she was up in the night again. How am I gonna make it through this day? I have too many meetings to lose this much sleep, right? Oh gosh, I hope that coffee maker's on, right? We start from a position of scarcity. We don't have enough time and we didn't get enough sleep, right? It's depletion, depletion, depletion. And so I've really tried to focus on, in terms of my continuous improvement, starting the day from a place of gratitude and willingness instead of depletion and scarcity. And that I have found really changes the tone for the entire day, right? If you start out negative, you're probably more likely to end negative. If you start out positive, well, at least you tried, right? I saw a cartoon recently from the New Yorker, and a friend of mine sent it to me. Thank you, Sarah Walker. And the cartoon, it's a person on a couch in a psychiatrist's office, and the patient says, I tried to seize the day, but then the day did some wild jujitsu move and landed me on my backside, right? But at least you gotta start with trying to seize the day. And that's how I feel about continuous improvement. I also do very specific exercises in terms of a goal sheet. So I personally have a goal sheet across 6 different categories, from spiritual to financial to personal to vocational. And there's short, medium, and long-term goals within that chart. Just a 1-pager basic Excel sheet. Nothing fancy, no big whoop. But for me, it's something I carry around in my portfolio every single day. And when I get a few extra minutes in between meetings while I'm waiting for a meeting room, I'll take a peek at that sheet and kind of do a personal assessment of where I'm at with those particular goals. And that's one of the tools I utilize to help me stay on track. Does that help? Okay.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
So first off, I thought your presentation was fantastic.
Thank you.
And I really admire your optimism. It's definitely a quality that I share with you. And in my own experience, I have found that sometimes that's negative to people, and they dislike the optimism, and they try very hard to squelch that and bring you back to reality.
Sure.
And so my question is, how do you allow yourself to continue being very positive, and more so doing it for the right reasons? A lot of times I think we do things to prove people wrong.
Right.
And so how do you make sure that
a little spiteful, maybe?
Right. And
Yeah.
how do you make sure you're continuing to live to yourself and ignoring the naysayers?
So I would probably say a couple of things. We might want to have coffee. But certainly optimists and pessimists can rub each other the wrong way. It goes both ways, right? But oftentimes people who are outwardly negative to you, they're dealing with their own saboteurs, right? It's not really you, it's their own prison that they're in, and the rest of us just swim through it with them, okay? And that's the same for every person, whether you're optimists or pessimists. Being an optimist, you are faced with lots of opportunities to slide deeply and quickly into negativity. However, I do encourage you to stay the course. I have noticed that also being a lively person, I have to tone it down sometimes, right? So when I walk into the room and say, "Hi, y'all! Isn't it a great day? It's fantastic!" That there's certain people you probably shouldn't do that with. You might just want to say, "Good morning," right? And inside you can be jubilant and ecstatic, and you can still feel all of that same stuff. But unless you really want to give someone a migraine, you might just want to tone it down a little bit. And you know, there's the importance of talking to people on their own level, wherever they're at. Meet them wherever they are at, right? If it's pessimism that is coming from them, then understand they've got their own burdens. They might be going through their own stuff, right? They may have a really rough home life. They may have just failed a test. We have no clue on the surface what people are going through. And so there's a role there for compassion as well. So instead of taking it like a personal attack, just understand that they're going through their own thing. Apply some compassion, tone it down a little, speak to them wherever you can, and then just move on, right? It may not be someone you want to invite in your theater, right? But it may be someone you have in your class. There's a certain amount of exchange you have to happen, but that doesn't mean you have to date them, right? It doesn't mean you have to have a meal with them, but it does mean we do need to figure out positive ways of making sure it's a collaborative engagement. Does that help? Okay. Never let them see you sweat. Yeah, don't hand that microphone to my husband. No, 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 no.
I'd like to move back to your role at Elavon,
Great.
New Product Development Innovation.
Great. Yes.
Is leading innovation a different set of capabilities than other kinds of leadership? Part A.
Now you're getting philosophical on me. I should have known when you introduced yourself to me earlier.
And part B, in the innovation world, we're hearing a lot about design thinking.
Yeah, sure.
And, the Harvard Business Review had it, on the cover recently. And I'm just wondering what an expert who spends day to day on new product development and innovation thinks about design thinking. Is it a fad, or is it a real process that will enable more innovation?
Okay, so I heard about 6 questions that I'd like to respond to. So guide me through them. First, I'm glad you're convinced I'm an expert, because that means I have you fooled. But at Elavon, we are actually all charged with innovation. Okay, so our leaders have repeatedly asked us to ensure that we are the tip of the spear. It doesn't matter if innovation is in your title. It doesn't matter what your role is. Brian, you're nodding your head. But everything we do needs to be from an innovative mindset. And so I would encourage people to read a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. It's a fabulous book. There's an online assessment. You know how I love those, right? And so I have found that people who are innovative, it's more about their mindset than their role, their rank, their pay grade, anything of that nature. So if you have a growth mindset, you're much more likely to be innovative in your approach. What were the next 4 pieces of your question?
What do you think about design thinking?
Design thinking. Sure. So I read the book titled Design Thinking. It's part of the Katie Huie Library at Elavon. It's a regular piece that is loaned out to colleagues. I think there's a lot of valuable construct to that, because there is sort of a reputation for innovation that we can spend all the money we want, we have no constraints, and so on and so forth, that there's no process, that a bunch of really hip people who dress well sit in a room and dream up crazy stuff that a company really can't pull off. And that is a complete fallacy, right? So innovation to me is more about the how right? And pieces of that how, certainly design thinking has some pieces of that. But I would encourage a company when they're thinking about what innovation is, start with the definition. If a company doesn't know what innovation is, you're in trouble. That's a question that many people ask me in career fairs and different things. How do I know if it's an innovative company? Ask them. Ask them in your interview process, what is the definition of innovation? And the definition of innovation at Elavon and US Bank is transforming ideas into value for our shareholders, employees, customers, and partners. And that is tried, true, and it's what we live to at the company. So if our ideas are not translating to value for our consumers of our products, we're in trouble. Then we're not innovating within our particular constraints. So there are certainly fads with innovation. Innovation itself is a fad sometimes, but there's always best practices at the basics of that. Some of those include brainstorming, right? All of us have been part of a good brainstorm. Most of us have been part of a really bad brainstorm, right? The most effective brainstorms happen in the preparation stage. So about 9/10 of your effort should go into preparation for a brainstorm. The last 10th, driving into home, that's the hour you actually spend brainstorming, okay? So there's definitely a lot of good, solid basics that can be applied regardless of what book you read, regardless of what you want to call it. Stick to those innovation best practices. Did that address all the components? Great, we need to go to lunch then.
Katie, this will be our last question.
Great.
Thank you for your speech. Have you ever been a part of the interview process or the onboarding process, and what would you recommend to new job candidates?
Sure. So I have been a hiring manager in my past. I happen to be an individual contributor now. I once managed a team of approximately 12 people, and it was great fun. Very different, hard fun, but fun nonetheless. And that particular role from an interview process, I encourage you to be yourself. Please be yourself, because if you're not yourself and then you end up on the job, you're gonna feel really out of sync with yourself, right? So be yourself. If you're a happy-go-lucky person, then show that joy in the meeting. If you're a more serious person, honor that serious person within you, right? But if you're faking it in an interview in any way, shape, or form, the act will soon be over. Right? And then both you and your team and your manager aren't going to feel real great about that. So just be true to yourself and do a lot of deep breathing before you go in. Breathe from the belly.
Katie, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.